Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Pastor David. Thank you, Pastor Darren, elders, for your leadership for this church. I'm really excited for this opportunity to be speaking on Veterans Day weekend. And I want to say that if this is your first or second time here, by the way, we are so excited that you're joining us also. And if you have not heard it yet, welcome. Welcome to CrossCity. Welcome to the CrossCity family. Can you believe it's already November, by the way? Is anyone else wrestling with that? Anyone listening to Christmas music yet? Anyone? Oh, good. Okay, all right. Those are my Christmas people. Good. I love my Christmas people. Good. Well, hey, grab your Bibles or jump on your Bible app and open to Ephesians chapter 5. And we're going to get there in just a little bit. Just a heads up, I have the world's longest intro, but I promise I'm going to tie it all together. And in the very end, we're going to get into some application. But I want to start with a story. It was the fall of 1996. I was in the 8th grade. And it was around Veterans Day, it was around this time of year, and we were studying history in school, world history. And part of that lesson was talking about the different wars. We were studying the different wars. And my teacher gave the class an assignment. We had to watch a movie about a war and then write an essay and give a report on that movie. We had to write about the nature of war, right? We had to write about how America was involved in the war. We had to write about how the conflict could have been resolved differently, you know, that kind of stuff. the kind of stuff that an 8th grade kid cannot possibly understand. And so I remember I wanted to watch a movie about the Vietnam War because my dad had served in that war and I didn't really fully understand all that had gone on over there and I didn't really quite get that war and everything that happened. So I wanted to watch a movie about the Vietnam War and I decided I wanted to watch Good Morning Vietnam. I mean, how bad could it be, really? Like, it had Robin Williams in it, right? He was fantastic in Mrs. Doubtfire, right? The original Jumanji had just come out, which was amazing. Hook was one of my favorite all-time movies as a kid. And plus, could there be a better genie in Aladdin? I mean, I'm just saying, like, no offense to Will Smith. I'm just saying, it's not even a competition. You know, I loved Robin Williams. Now, my parents had a pretty hard and fast rule in the house about no rated R movies, which is a good rule. It's a rule that my wife and I have with our family now. I remember growing up, my mom would always say, garbage in is garbage out. And it used to drive me nuts. But now that I'm an adult and I have kids, I'm like, that's pretty good philosophy. I'm gonna use that. But for this one time, my dad decided to overlook the rated R rule because, well, there wasn't a lot of movies about Vietnam that were PG-13. And quite frankly, there's just not a lot of movies about war that are PG-13. And so he said we could rent that movie. Now, you have to remember, the year is 1996. We didn't just jump on an app on our smart TV and stream the movie. No. We had to jump in a car and drive to town to the local movie store called Blockbuster, right? Some of you guys have a Blockbuster card in your wallet. You gotta clean it out. We had to endure the tough life, okay? But we got to Blockbuster and we asked where the movie was and it was out. The movie had been rented. Now, for those of you who remember, a newly released movie would have about 40 copies. About half of the wall was taken up for all the newly released movies. But the older movies would have like 1 or maybe 2 copies in the entire store. And that was like the worst feeling when the movie you really wanted to watch was rented. So at that point, you had a couple options. Right? You didn't want to get back in your car and drive home empty-handed. You'd already gone through the hassle of putting your slippers on and getting into the car and driving to the store. And so your first option was to pull a George Costanza from Seinfeld and try to peek at the screen to see who had rented the movie. You know, maybe you knew that person. You could call them. You could borrow the movie. You could watch it with them. But that clerk was usually pretty protective of that screen. And so option 2 was to pick a different movie. Now, if you were there picking a movie for entertainment purposes, I guess it's not that big of a deal. You really wanted to watch this movie, they didn't have it, it was already rented, so you had to choose a different movie. It's not the end of the world, not that big of a deal. But this was, we were there for a school assignment, which was probably due the next day, which I'm sure my parents were the only ones that ever had to deal with that. And so we didn't really have many options, right? I really needed to rent a movie about a war. And so the clerk said, Well, we don't have Good Morning Vietnam available, but we do have Apocalypse Now available for rent. I'm in the 8th grade. And I really wanted to do a report on the Vietnam War. And so my dad, probably against all of the wisdom in his body and all of the better judgment in his body, he said, okay, fine, we'll rent that. And so we got home and I put the VHS tape in. We didn't have a DVD player yet because those were invented in 1996. And I put the VHS, and if you don't know what a VHS tape is, that just means I'm officially old, by the way. I hit play and I start the movie. And within 4 minutes of that movie starting, I was not doing good. I was feeling completely overwhelmed. But I knew I had to watch this movie. I knew I had to do this report. And then it gets to that scene about halfway through the movie where the American helicopters are attacking that Vietnamese village right beside the ocean. And there was so much violence. There was so much going on. There was so much going on in my mind. I was wrestling with this whole idea of attacking this village full of seemingly innocent people just dressed in normal clothes. For what? I couldn't understand it. But then I couldn't understand when they were trying to medevac out one of the wounded American soldiers in a helicopter, and these people dressed in normal clothes were coming up to the helicopter. I thought they were trying to escape, only to find out they were dropping grenades in the helicopter to blow it up. I was so confused, and I lost it. I completely broke down. I started weeping. And about that time, my dad walked in, and we began to talk, and we began to debrief about what I just saw. And he talked about some of the experiences he had when he was stationed overseas in Thailand at an air base less than 500 miles due west of Hanoi, Vietnam. And we talked about how, hey, you didn't know who the enemy was. They didn't wear uniforms like other countries did. The jungle was a completely different place than most Americans had ever even been to or ever thought about. He talked about having to go on patrol in the middle of the night around his base in the pitch black, but because they were stationed in Thailand, he wasn't allowed to carry a rifle with him. And so he had to go on patrol in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of the night, with no weapon whatsoever. He talked about how the fighter jets would have to make emergency landings at his airbase because they were trying to bomb Hanoi, but then they would be shot down, and this was the closest American airbase, and so they made regular emergency landings. Listen, war is horrific. War is terrible. And we're seeing that right now in Israel and in Ukraine. The things that our men and women, our military men and women have to see and experience are some of the most awful things a human has to endure. But this is Veterans Day weekend. This is a weekend that we're supposed to celebrate and honor those who have served. I did a little research to refresh my memory about the history of Veterans Day. The day falls on the anniversary of the signing of the armistice that ended World War I. Major hostilities of the First Great War were formally ended at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. And then a year later, President Woodrow Wilson declared November 11th a holiday, for those who fought so bravely for their country. And there are so many ways to celebrate and honor our vets across the country. There are parades with military bands and fighter jet flyovers and delicious barbecue. In some parts of the country, they have concerts or they have friendship quilts. Even Disney World in Orlando honors and celebrates at its park with free haircuts for veterans right on Main Street. And the kids get a ballpark style hot dog and French fries. But the thing is, my dad was not proud when he returned home. He was not met as a hero. He was not honored. He felt ashamed. He didn't want to talk about what had happened over there during his time in the military. He wanted to move past it as quickly as he possibly could. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. because you yourselves returned home to insults or protests or family members who wouldn't talk to you. I grew up hearing the occasional story from my dad's time in the service, but he would never really talk about it in public. See, I grew up knowing about war, but never really understanding the impact of war. And quite honestly, in all of the years I've been preaching, I've never even preached a sermon about Veterans Day. And I started thinking about it in the 17 years I've been on staff here at CrossCity, I've never heard anyone preach a sermon about Veterans Day. And that's not really that confusing. That's not surprising because it's not like there's a Bible verse that talks about or talks to veterans. It's not really in there. And also it's, at least for me, it's pretty tough because I don't love the government. I don't love what the government stands for, and I don't love what the government believes in, and I don't love what the government supports or funds. And so for me, it's always been easier to separate church from politics. I'll talk politics with you Monday through Friday, but on the weekend when we're at church, for me, I've always believed it is all about Christ and Christ alone. But recently my mind was changed. My eyes were opened. This past spring, my dad and I had a chance to fly to Washington, D.C. as members of the Central Valley Honor Flight. And if you're not familiar with the Honor Flight program, about 18 years ago, a couple on the East Coast decided that they wanted to honor the vets of their community by flying them to Washington, D.C. And so they raised a lot of money, and they flew all of the vets to Washington, D.C., and they were able to visit the memorials that were built to commemorate their service and their sacrifice. And now, to this day, around the country, they fly nearly over about 22,000 veterans every year to Washington, D.C. They've flown nearly 275,000 veterans since its beginning. And this past May, my dad had the privilege of being chosen as one of those veterans to go to Washington, D.C. And I was lucky enough to go with him as his guardian. And yeah. I had to open bottles of water for him. He really, he took advantage. There were nearly 200 veterans and guardians on our flight. In fact, they chartered the entire plane just for us, but it didn't stop there. We were ushered through airports like VIPs. The buses that took us to the memorials, we were allowed to park in areas that no one else was allowed to park in. We got police escorts through the streets of Washington, D.C. as we went from memorial to memorial. We got to sit in the chairs of the congressmen on the House floor and speak to our local representatives. It was all about honoring these men and women who fought so bravely and sacrificed so much. It was amazing. But it was during the bus rides and the flights and the meals that some of the most incredible stories were told. We met one older man in the airport that came over and sat by us, and he reached into his pocket and he pulled out this string and he tied it into a loop, and he looked at us and he said, you want to see a magic trick? And Dad and I were like, we looked at each other like, oh, this is gonna be, yeah, sure, absolutely. My dad was very kind about it. And he takes this piece of string and he begins to tie it and wrap it all around his fingers, and it looked like a complete mess. And then he said, okay, now put your finger right here. And then somehow, I have no idea, but that string, that tangled spider web of string became completely free. He showed us how he did it, and I still have no idea what happened. And then he said, do you want to know where I learned that little trick? And we're like, yeah, of course, sure, yeah. We were thinking like a magic book or a TV show, And he said, I learned that in Vietnam. My helicopter was shot down behind enemy lines, and we found a little cave to hide in. And we were in that cave for over 3 weeks until we were rescued, and we had to figure out ways to pass the time. And it turns out that guy had flown over 150 missions during the Vietnam War. When I heard stories like his, when I met men and women who served, when I saw hundreds of elementary age kids lined up as far as I could see at the tomb of the unknown soldier there on a field trip because they wanted to shake the hands of every veteran on our flight, I realized I had a knowledge of war, but I didn't understand the impact of war. See, on that trip, those men and women who returned home from war feeling ashamed were given honor. They were given a sense of pride. And I realized on that trip that nearly every good thing that I have in my life is because of their service and their sacrifice. And so today, right now, I want to honor all of the veterans who attend our services. If you served in the armed forces, in the Air Force, in the Army, in the Coast Guard, in the Marines, in the Navy, if you are able, would you just please stand right now? Go ahead and please stand right now. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you, veterans. Thank you, veterans. Thank you, veterans, for your service and for your sacrifice. You know, after that trip, after seeing my dad as proud as a peacock because he served in the Air Force, I came to the realization that I have been selfish in my thinking. And for too long, I've taken our veterans for granted. I have not been grateful enough for our veterans. Someone once wrote, it is the veteran, not the preacher, who gives us the freedom of religion. It is the veteran, not the reporter, who gives us the freedom of the press. It is the veteran, not the poet, who gives us the freedom of speech. It is the veteran, not the demonstration organizer, who gives us the freedom to assemble. It is the veteran, not the lawyer, who gives us the right to the fair trial. And it is the veteran, not the politician, who gives us the right to vote. This Veterans Day weekend, I'm feeling grateful. I am grateful for what the veterans of our country have provided for us. And like I said earlier, when I first heard that I was preaching on Veterans Day, I was kind of struggling with it. I thought maybe I could speak about courage. You know, Deuteronomy 31:6, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified, for the Lord your God goes with you and he will never leave you or forsake you. I mean, that would have been a pretty good verse, right? I thought about bravery. I thought about enduring hard times. I thought about standing firm in the faith. 1 Corinthians 16:13, stand firm in the faith, be strong. I didn't know if I should talk about the armor of God in Ephesians. Have you ever noticed that the armor of God, there's no protection on the backside? That's because with the power of the Lord, we can conquer any battle because we can be victorious in Jesus' name. I thought that seemed like a fitting set of verses. But here's the thing. I don't want to talk about those things. I want to talk about being grateful. I want to talk about these three things that I came up with how to be grateful on this Veterans Day weekend. First, I am grateful for their sacrifice. I'm grateful for their sacrifice. And I know, this is Veterans Day, it's not Memorial Day. I know the difference between the two. But I also want to recognize that some made the ultimate sacrifice for us. And I think I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that fact. John 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. Listen, some made the ultimate sacrifice, and I am so grateful for that. But I also want to recognize that so many others made sacrifices in completely different ways. Some had to leave families behind for months or even years. Some had to travel to places in foreign countries and live in extreme conditions. Some had to face situations that we could not possibly imagine. And so on this Veterans Day, I am grateful for their service for us. Second, I'm grateful for our freedom. I'm grateful for our freedom. I'm extremely grateful for the freedoms that the Constitution gives us. I'm extremely grateful for the freedoms that men and women have fought for years to protect. But mostly, catch this, I am grateful for the freedom to gather and worship Christ without fear of persecution. Every weekend we gather here at CrossCity as a church to worship the Lord and to hear his word. And we never have to worry about someone hearing that we're meeting. We never have to worry about someone hearing what we're talking about or what we're singing about. I am grateful for that because that is not the case for so many Christians around the world. I have college classmates who became missionaries in places like Iran and Afghanistan and Jordan and some other places in the Middle East. And when they write letters back home, they have to speak in code because if they were found out that they were a Christian missionary, they would be killed on the spot. Not everyone gets to enjoy the freedoms that we have. Ephesians 5:20, Paul says, always give thanks to God the Father for everything. I am thankful for our freedom to worship the Lord. Many of you know and support Mid-India Christian Mission. We as a church support Mid-India Christian Mission. And as many of you know, David and Sheila Law and a few of the other leaders of the mission have had to go into hiding recently. See, it's illegal in India to talk to anyone about becoming a Christian. And the current political leaders there, they are extremists and they hate Christians. And they've gone so far. Even large, giant, massive organizations like Compassion International have been kicked out of the country. And now the target has turned to Mid-India. And fake lawsuits have been brought against them. Threats of imprisonment have been brought against them. Threats against their lives have been brought against them. Recently, 256 churches were burned in 1 month in Northeast India. And here we sit in absolute freedom. And we don't have to worry about any of that. We have freedoms that are sometimes, we take for granted. And what's amazing is in the middle of all that persecution, Mid-India continues to change lives one person at a time. They've baptized over 1,500 people in the last 10 years. Thousands of kids all around the country have a safe place to study education, study school, and also learn about Jesus. And I feel like, shouldn't we be doing at least that much in our complete freedom? We've been going through the book of Philippians. Paul writes the letter from prison, and yet he's worshiping and praising the Lord. How much more should we be worshiping in our complete freedom? Lastly, I'm grateful for the opportunity we have. Not the kind of opportunities you think of. I am grateful for the opportunities that we have as Americans. We can create businesses. We can travel wherever or whenever we want to. We have a great educational system. We encourage cultural and social diversity. Americans have so many opportunities. We can choose to do whatever we want, whatever we set our minds to. It's really incredible. It's pretty fantastic. But that's not the kind of opportunity that I'm really grateful for. Ephesians 5, just a few verses earlier, verses 15 and 16 say, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. Listen, making the most of every opportunity. The ancient Greeks had a god named Kairos, who was the personification of opportunity. Archaeologists have excavated a statue of this god, and it was a pretty strange looking statue because there were wings on its feet, and he had a tuft of hair hanging over his face, and then he was completely bald on the back of his head. And the inscription below the statue read this: what is your name? My name is Opportunity. Why are there wings on your feet? Because I fly like the wind. Why do you have hair hanging over your face? For him who meets me to take hold of me. Why are you bald in the back? Because no man can grasp me once I'm past. Someone once wrote, there are 3 things that can never be recalled: a shot arrow, a spoken word, and a lost opportunity. And we've all missed opportunities, whether we know it or not. We've all missed opportunities. But I think there's some things that we can do. There's some steps we can take to make sure we don't miss out on opportunities in the future. First, don't miss the opportunity to spend time with Jesus. People say, man, I'm just killing time here. Like, wow, hey, listen, I'm trying to buy some time. Man, I'm just losing time. I'm losing time. Listen, you can't kill time or buy time or lose time. You can only spend time. And we get to choose how we spend that time. Are we gonna spend that time wisely or unwisely? No one else gets to decide how you spend your time. Don't spend your time based on the pressures of life. Instead, focus on the eternal. Focus on the things that will make an eternal difference. You won't grow as a Christian. You won't be effective as a Christian unless you spend time with Jesus. I don't know about you, but every week when my cell phone turns me how much screen time I've had, I'm always shocked. I look at that little report and I think to myself, there's no way I spent that much time on Instagram. Like, did I really watch that many YouTube videos? We have a certain amount of time every day, and we get to choose how we spend that time, how we use that time. Think about it like this. Imagine it like this. Imagine if I said, starting tonight, going from here forward, every night at midnight, I'm going to deposit $1,440 into your bank account. You'd be like, I love where this story's going, man. Tell me more. But then it would come with a stipulation. The stipulation is this. You have to use all $1,440 within 24 hours or whatever's remaining would just disappear. Now, I imagine you would be using all $1,440 every day, right? You'd be out buying cars and buying diamonds and like one pair of leggings at Lululemon. It's an expensive place. You wouldn't just spend $200 and then leave the rest. You wouldn't do that. Here's the deal. Every day, God deposits 1,440 minutes into our lives. And we get to choose how we use those. We get to choose whether we're going to spend them wisely or unwisely. There's no way to increase that time. There's no way to buy more time. So don't miss the opportunity to spend time with Jesus. Second, don't miss the opportunity to share Jesus with a friend. Always be on the lookout for the opportunity that God is placing in your life to talk to someone about Jesus. We all know someone who, as far as we know, is not a Christian. And we need to live constantly in search of the opportunity to share the love of Jesus with that person. And as I reflect on this idea, I have to be honest with you, I miss this opportunity a lot. I miss this opportunity all the time. I'll invite someone to go on the golf course with me and I think, good, we've got 4 hours to talk about Jesus. They're gonna hate this at the end of it. I'm gonna talk about Jesus for 4 hours. And then by hole 3, I'm losing by 3 strokes and my competitive side kicks in and I wanna win. And I throw all my plans out the window. And by about hole 6, he says, hey, so are you still working over at the church? And I go, would you please just be quiet? I'm trying to focus here, okay? A few holes later, say, hey, so what do you do at the church anyway? Okay, listen, I'm trying to make this putt. I'm gonna need you to stop talking. And I miss opportunities all the time. I miss opportunities all the time. But there's one other opportunity that I wanna make sure you don't miss out on. And that is the opportunity to be saved. Don't miss the opportunity to be saved. Don't miss the opportunity to commit your life to Christ. Isaiah 55:6 says, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. The encouraging part of that verse is that the Lord can be found. The Lord is near. But the scary part of that verse is that it implies that there is a time when he may not be found and that he may not be near. This Veterans Day weekend, we celebrate and we honor those that gave us freedom. But listen, 2,000 years ago, Jesus came and he died and he was raised to life to give us the ultimate freedom from our sin. Every weekend here at CrossCity, we provide an opportunity for you to respond to the Lord. In just a few moments, we're gonna sing a song. There's gonna be some staff and some leaders that are gonna be down here in the front. And if you need to commit your life to Christ, if you need to be saved, I encourage you to simply walk down this aisle and come talk with one of them. If you're already a Christian and you just need some prayer, if you need someone to talk to about a big decision you're making, whatever it is, I encourage you to come down here and respond right now. Let's all stand and sing.